Hi, this is Kirk, the bariatric carnivore. Well, creatine has suddenly become all the rage. If you've noticed on YouTube lately, there have been a lot of different influencers touting the wonders and beauty of creatine, and why we do not do 15, 20, 50 grams of it a day is, beyond them. Well, I'm currently skeptical when it comes to supplements, because in my lifetime there's been a whole host of them that they told us were going to be great for us, but turned out to be kind of harmful. Vitamin A was supposed to be this big protection against cancer, etc. Well, the problem is when you take it in isolation, not in food. It's perfectly fine in your food, but when you take it just by itself, it can create problems and make your chances of getting lung cancer go up. So any of the studies that have been done on that in the past have been, always stopped because it was creating other problems. Or there was the calcium debacle. Now, for a while there, women were losing bone, and it was becoming a huge problem as they were getting women from eating a normal diet, heavy in red-based meat, and they were starting to push them toward, boneless, skinless chicken breast and, very low-fat diets, etc. Women started losing bone mass, so they said, okay, we've got the answer. We're going to say you start taking calcium. Well, there's a problem with that. Calcium doesn't get absorbed by itself. And when you just eat calcium by itself, it has a tendency to go into the arteries and cause calcification and other issues. So they quickly said, quit doing that. Okay, so, I've seen over my lifetime different times when different supplements were supposed to be the big beat-all and end-all, and they've had problems. But there are some that I do take. I can't say that I am completely, against supplements. I do supplement with mineral magnesium because, I think it's ancestrally appropriate. My ancestors used to get magnesium because they were drinking stream water or from mud puddles or something like that. And, there's minerals in the water that they were drinking, and magnesium was getting into the system through that. Well, my government takes magnesium out of the water supply. So if you're just drinking tap water, you're not getting magnesium. So I supplement with that using a recipe that Dr. William Davis has, and if you want to look up William Davis and magnesium water, it's a very cheap supplement, and it's a nice way of, 1 cup of that magnesium water a day probably gives me more than enough magnesium to keep my body healthy. Okay. And I take vitamin D with vitamin K2, and there's a reason for that. I keep listening to people over time that keep showing, and this happened during COVID when I really started looking into it, that I started to realize that how important a high level of vitamin D was to the body. And I also found out that as you get older, it is tougher to absorb vitamin D through the skin and, that natural tanning process. And I do spend a lot of time in the sun, and I do try to, be out there for at least an hour every day, but, weather doesn't always cooperate. And there's this thing called seasons. So, sometimes the vitamin D level drops. And if it's, to me, between 50 and 100 is a healthy vitamin D level. And I don't know if supplementation, I'm not a scientist, and I can't tell with certainty, but one of the things that's kind of bugs me about this is I don't know if a low vitamin D level is just a symptom of a poor metabolic response, or if you're just not getting enough. I don't know, but I'm willing to hedge my bets. It's a relatively inexpensive thing, and when you take it, vitamin D in conjunction with vitamin K2, it seems to help get calcium out of the bloodstream into your bones, helps with muscle tissue. It acts almost like a hormone as far as increasing the amount of testosterone in the body. So there's a lot of good things that come along with vitamin D and K2 working together. But this brings us to creatine. Now, creatine is a substance that your body makes. It makes about 2 grams or so every single day. And if you eat a couple of pounds of red meat, you get a couple of extra grams of creatine. So, I don't think I'm going to have any real shortage of creatine. But what's interesting about creatine, and I remember when it came out, the first studies came out in the 70s and the 80s, is things like the NFL were trying to ban creatine as a performance-enhancing drug that, it made you stronger. So therefore, it had to be like an anabolic steroid. Well, that's not true. There doesn't seem to be any downside to taking it. It doesn't behave like an anabolic steroid. It doesn't cause you to lose your hair. There's nothing in there that's doing anything except for increasing the amount of water that the muscle is storing, and it seems to increase muscle output, particularly under moments of heavy stress. So it's not something that you're going to take and get stronger, but when you utilize it with a resistance program, some sort of resistance training, lifting weights, doing something, body weight, whatever, it actually does seem to increase the amount of strength that you're going to develop by maybe 10 to 20%, which is not bad as far as I'm concerned, because it's a relatively inexpensive supplement, and it's been so well studied over the years that it is pretty darn safe. So there's no downside to taking it. And if it made you, stronger, which is one of my goals, I want more muscle and I want to be stronger, then it seemed to me to make sense. So I supplemented a couple of extra grams of creatine a day. Now, this brings us to where we are now with creatine, and what they are starting to figure out is that it really seems to help a brain under stress. And stress can come in different forms. I mean, when you're trying to study something really hard, so different students, or if you're really taxing your brain on certain tasks, adding in, going up to about 20 grams of creatine might help out. Getting a horrible night's sleep is a stressor. Just being under stress under certain circumstances, boosting your creatine. And the reason why they keep saying 15 to 20 grams of extra creatine is because the body, the muscles seem to absorb the first 5 grams almost greedily. From everything I can read and determine by looking at all these different studies and listening to these different lectures, is the first 5 grams seem to go to the muscles, but after that, as you boost it up, the brain starts to absorb more, and the brain creates its own a certain amount of creatine, but when you boost it up to close to 20 grams, it starts to absorb it. So I've been experimenting with it over the last few weeks, and I am finding that it does produce some tremendous mental clarity. I was flying back a couple of weeks ago on a trip, and plane came in really late, and I had to be up early the next day, for work. And I said, okay, let's go ahead and try, doing an extra heavy load of creatine, and boosted up to 20. And it seemed to increase my overall focus and kept me alert during the day without making me jittery. But when I tried to do that on days when I wasn't particularly stressed or I got a good night's sleep, it didn't seem to have any additional benefit. So it does seem to be dose dependent on periods of time when you're under real stress for whatever reason. But boy, the days after bad night's sleep, I will boost that dosage, and it seems to make a difference. Now, how do you take it? Well, I take 5 grams now. I've started buying my creatine in bulk, and it's got a little 5 gram scoop, and I put it in my coffee first thing in the morning. I do that every day. And when I'm under particular stress or something like that, I will mix it in with water, and I do it in basically 5 gram implements and scatter it throughout the day. And that really seems to produce that extra boost that I need, and it does seem to help keep me focused. Is it the be all and end all? I don't know. Could it be a placebo effect? I don't think so, because it doesn't seem to work when I've had great sleep or I'm not under any particular stress. So it's not like a performance enhancing drug, but it does seem to help the brain when it is under stress. So, Is it going to change your life? Is it going to make you a Superman? Are you going to take it and suddenly become Arnold Schwarzenegger? No. But will it, 5 grams as a dose that has been proven to make you physically stronger? Yeah, that seems to be true. And, 15 to 20 when you're under really heavy stress or had a bad night's sleep, that seems to help too. So this is Kirk, the Bariatric Carnivore. Give it a shot. Some people can tolerate it. Some people have GI issues. But if you're, generally healthy and and you're under stress and you had a horrible night's sleep, give it a shot. See if it helps keep you more focused without making you really jittery. This is Kirk, the Bariatric Carnivore, and I try to put out a couple messages each week. If you like this message, please hit like and subscribe. Join this channel of other like-minded folks. I will talk to you again soon.